Landlocked, small, and what some think geopolitically insignificant, Moldova is not your typical headline grabber, but it is a critical pawn in the escalating tensions between Russia and the West. On September 28th, Moldovans will head to the polls for the parliamentary elections that are far more than a domestic political contest. This is a struggle over a nation's very identity and a potential trigger for regional instability. Central to this struggle is Moldova's path towards European Union integration, championed by the current government. This is a deeply divisive issue, fracturing society along linguistic, generational, and geographic lines. For many, it represents a break from a painful Soviet past and a promise of prosperity. But for others, it is an abandonment of historical ties to Russia and a submission to Western interests. But beyond the political debate, this is a profound clash of geopolitical allegiances. Powerful external forces are deeply invested in the outcome of these elections. Some want integration with the West to continue, while others will profit from political crises. This geopolitical tug-of-war has transformed this small nation into a critical arena for the broader contest between Russia and the West. So, how is Russia attempting to sway Moldovans, and what makes this small, often overlooked nation so strategically relevant in the grand chessboard of geopolitics? If you're interested in learning more about what happens beyond the headlines, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because in our world, every move matters. The upcoming legislative elections are the political flashpoint for a much deeper economic and geopolitical struggle. At its heart, it is a contest between two distinct visions for Moldova. The incumbent Party of Action and Solidarity, which gained power in 2020, has pursued an agenda centered on European Union integration. This platform is challenged by a strong opposition bloc that advocates for restoring and strengthening ties with Russia. Historically, Russia has had significant economic influence in Moldova, particularly in the energy sector. For decades, Moldova was almost completely dependent on Russia's Gazprom for its natural gas supply. This relationship, a legacy of its Soviet past, provided a means of influence, as the threat of price hikes or supply disruptions gave Moscow considerable leverage. And this energy dependence was a tool used to discourage Chisinau from pursuing policies deemed unfavorable to Russian interests. But beyond energy, trade has been a consistent instrument of foreign policy. Russia, once Moldova's primary export market, has periodically placed restrictions on key Moldovan agricultural exports, such as wine and fruits, often coinciding with periods of political friction or pro-Western shifts in Chisinau. In response, and accelerated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Moldova has increasingly reoriented its trade westwards. The signing of a free trade area with the European Union was a pivotal geopolitical move, fundamentally reorienting its economic axis. The EU is now Moldova's largest trading partner, a reality that has lessened Moscow's economic leverage but also deepened the country's integration into Western economic and regulatory frameworks. This has raised alarm bells in Moscow, and as its economic levers weaken, Russia's strategy pivots towards exploiting the country's internal divisions. Moscow's strategy involves a broad campaign of disinformation and the clandestine financing of pro-Kremlin political parties to undermine the current government. Kremlin critics claim that the ultimate goal is to halt Chisinau's European integration and install a puppet government that would bring the country back into the Russian sphere of influence, which Moscow considers essential to its security interests. To grasp the geopolitical significance of Moldova, we must first look at the internal divisions and unresolved conflicts, which have been for decades exploited by external actors. The two significant flashpoints are the breakaway region of Transnistria and the autonomous region of Gagauzia. Transnistria, a narrow strip of land on the eastern bank of the Dniester River, has been a de facto independent state since a brief but violent conflict in the early 1990s. Transnistria is far more than a relic of the Soviet Union or a frozen conflict. It is a strategic asset for Moscow. It hosts the operational group of Russian forces with about 1,500 Russian soldiers and the massive Kolbasna ammunition depot, one of the largest in Eastern Europe. So Transnistria gives Russia a permanent military foothold on NATO's doorstep and within striking distance of the Ukrainian port of Odessa. Economically, the region functions as a gray zone, a hub for smuggling and illicit financial flows that enrich a pro-Russian elite and undermine Moldova's formal economy and rule of law. By sustaining this conflict in Transnistria, Russia ensures that Moldova remains territorially fragmented and institutionally weakened, making full integration into Western structures like the European Union or NATO practically impossible without a resolution on Moscow's terms. Then there's Gagauzia, an autonomous region in the south of Moldova with predominantly Turkic Orthodox Christian population. The local authorities in Gagauzia have often been at odds with the central government in Chisinau, and the region has been a fertile ground for Russian influence operations. For context, President Maia Sandu received little over 3% of the votes in Gagauzia, while the 2024 referendum on EU accession was rejected by more than 95%. So by fueling separatism and anti-government sentiment in Gagauzia, Russia aims to bog down the Moldovan state in internal disputes, demonstrating the supposed failure of its pro-Western orientation. From Moscow's perspective, Moldova's importance is also geographic. Its location provides direct access to Ukraine's vulnerable southern flank. So, control over Moldova would offer a platform from which to project power and exert pressure across the entire Black Sea region. Therefore, securing both Ukraine and Moldova would allow Russia to establish a consolidated sphere of influence that is geographically anchored by the Carpathian Mountains. This would create an immense strategic buffer, pushing NATO's frontier back and fundamentally altering Europe's security architecture. A pro-Western Moldova, though, denies Russia that strategic depth and represents a crucial outpost that challenges Moscow's regional ambitions. So, this legislative election is nothing but a contest for control over the state's political apparatus. The composition of the next parliament will dictate whether the country continues its process of integration with Western institutions or pivots back towards a political and economic orientation aligned with Moscow. Yes, a legislative majority for the ruling party would accelerate this Western trajectory, while an opposition victory would likely halt, if not entirely reverse, this process. But a third scenario, that of a deadlocked parliament with no majority, is also a possible outcome. Such case would result in political paralysis, preventing Moldova from making a decisive commitment to any geopolitical bloc. The state of perpetual ambiguity could serve the interests of external powers seeking to keep Moldova as a neutral buffer state, unable to fully integrate with either the East or the West. The election will thus define Moldova's role in the region for years to come. It will serve as a clear barometer for the shifting balance of power along the great continental divide between Europe and Eurasia. Now, Moldova learns the oldest lesson of power. If you're not at the table, then you're probably on the menu. It's just geopolitics. Can a small nation like Moldova truly escape the influence of its powerful neighbors? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about politics and international affairs, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.